221. Gather intelligence. Huh? Edwin, isn't that Professor Jenna's name? Pratt stood there rubbing his head. Could this woman be the professor's old flame? He glanced back to ask Michonne for her opinion, but the space behind him was empty. Michonne had already moved away, long strides eating the ground, her katana ringing softly against her back. Hey! Wait for me, Pratt muttered, hurrying to catch up with aching legs. Meanwhile, in Block C of the prison, the underground interrogation room smelled damp and cold. Dim yellow light threw restless shadows across the concrete walls. Rick closed the notebook in his hand and stared coldly at Hempot, bruised and swollen, bound to a chair. After a rough welcome, the man's mouth had proved softer than their fists. He'd already spilled most of what he knew. The situation's mostly clear now, Rick said, turning to the others. According to his confession, the governor doesn't seem to have an accurate picture of us, Rick went on. He told his men that there are only a dozen or so survivors here, mostly old folks, women or children, with no proper weapons. That's why they only sent 2 squads, planning to overwhelm us with numbers and surprise. Rick's expression grew puzzled. He couldn't understand why such a meticulous man as the governor would make a mistake that big. He pointed to a red circle on the map. Woodbury is here. It matches the location that Driver gave us. He also confirmed the town's fortifications and an approximate head count. What about the other locations? Louis asked. He spread the map they'd taken from the abandoned car in the forest and pointed to additional marks beyond Woodbury and the prison. Are these other survivor strongholds? Supply points? If you had this much detail, why attack only us? Hempot blinked, struggling to lift his eyelids. Confusion clouded his gaze. I don't know, he croaked. He shook his head, voice ragged. I've never seen this map. The governor only ordered us to attack the prison. He never mentioned any other places. You don't know? Daryl scoffed and stepped forward, grabbing Hempot's collar. His look was hard. Seems like you're still holding back. You think we're being too nice to you? No, I really don't know, Hempot trembled. I swear, in Woodbury, I only led patrols and carried out missions. I've never seen a map like that. Maybe it was a secret job the governor gave that driver. I really don't know. Hempot's collapse looked real. Rick patted Daryl on the shoulder to ease him off. Hempot, pale and drained from blood loss and fear, slumped and passed out. Looks like he really doesn't know, Daryl said, wiping his hands. Maybe the governor doesn't trust him that much. This is troublesome, Rick said, brow knitted as he studied the map. We know where Woodbury is, but we don't know the governor's true capabilities. He might have other tricks up his sleeve. This could be a bait mission. What do we do? Rush over and kill them now? Merle leaned in the doorway, eager. No, that's too risky. Rick shook his head, forcing down the urge to run out and rescue Pratt. He had to think of the group's safety first. It's the middle of the night. We're in the light, they're in the dark. Charging in blind is exactly how you walk into an ambush. He made the call quickly. Double the guard tonight. Everyone rest, but be ready to fight at a moment's notice. At dawn, we'll send scouts to recon the outskirts of Woodbury. They all left, reluctant but recognizing it was the safest option. A few minutes later, only Merle remained in the dim corridor outside the interrogation room, half a cigarette in his mouth and a small knife twirling between his fingers. He heard footsteps and looked up as Louis returned. Yo, kid, Merle drawled, exhaling a smoke ring. You going back to sleep? Miss me so much you couldn't? I just think this guy might be hiding something else. Louis glanced at the heavy iron door with a harmless smile. I was thinking I could get him to open up a little more. Ha! Merle snorted. How? Tell him a bedtime story until he cries? With sincerity and a bit of psychological suggestion, Louis said. Merle waved him off. All right, stop. Get back to sleep. You've earned your fantasies for the night. Okay, kidding. Louis patted the briefcase in his hand and leaned in, voice lowered. I actually have some potent hallucinogen Professor Jenna gave me. Combined with suggestive techniques, it should be effective. Hallucinogen? Merle's eyes lit up. Not bad. Didn't expect a kid like you to carry tricks like that. He stubbed out his cigarette and moved to open the interrogation room door. Louis stopped him. Merle, this process needs silence. He blocked the doorway and kept his tone serious. When you mix drugs with psychological suggestion, the environment matters. If you're nearby, presence will interfere with the subject's subconscious state. If you want me to stand outside, just say so, Merle grumbled, rolling his eyes. Fine, these kids today have standards. He took a few steps away and muttered, I'm having another smoke. 10 minutes. If you're still messing around by then, you're going straight back to bed. Don't worry, I'll be quick. Luis entered the interrogation room and locked the heavy door behind him. Hempot was still unconscious, head bowed and bound to the chair. Luis didn't jolt him awake. He set the briefcase on the table and opened it. To weaken the man's mental defenses, he prepared the act. He took out a small vial of hallucinogen and injected it into Hempot's vein. Then he pulled from the case a yellowed page, the kind of page that belonged to Tom Riddle's diary. By the dim candlelight, Louis laid the parchment on the table, picked up a quill, and wrote a single line. All right, Professor Tom, I have a living person now. The ink sank into the paper and vanished. Seconds later, elegant cursive bled out across the page as if by an invisible hand. Very good. Whether it is legilimency or the imperious, nothing suits a fresh, defenseless mind as well for practice. Are you ready to begin? Luis glanced at the slumped Hempot, and a cold smile flickered across his face. He answered on the paper. Of course. Let's begin our lesson. 222. Mission Woodbury, Governor's Office. The chaos outside had been contained, but the room still hummed with tension. With a bang, the door was thrown open, and Lily rushed in, wild-eyed. Philip, everyone's terrified, she blurted, her voice tight. Those two escaped. If they really are from that prison, they'll come back with a force to get revenge. What are we going to do? Any word from the two squads we sent out? Do we need more reinforcements? She demanded. The governor stood with his back to her at the window, watching the guards below scrub blood from the square. He gripped a walkie-talkie, but only static came through. For a long heartbeat, he remained motionless. The glass reflected a grim, terrifying face, eyes like a gathering storm. He drew a slow breath, closed his eyes, and forced his expression calm. When he turned, the reassuring smile was back. Shh! Calm down, Lily, he said, putting his hands on her shoulders. It'll be fine. Hempot and the others are seasoned. They'll manage. His voice was steady, authoritative, as if it could hold up the sky. This morning was an accident. Someone inside helped them, but it's under control. A mole. Lily went pale. It's taken care of, Philip soothed. For now, your job is to go out and calm the residents. Tell them everything's safe. Don't let them panic. He guided the still doubtful Lily out to reassure the people. The moment the door shut, the smile dropped from Philip's face. He strode from the office toward the underground lab. Milton. The man at the bench jumped, nearly dropping a pile of components. He hurriedly pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Middle-aged, nervous, hair messy, shirt a little too big. Milton looked unsteady. Governor? How much longer on that thing? Philip asked coldly, eyeing the tangled wires and metal casings. Milton swallowed, picked up an unassembled detonator, and answered hesitantly. A little more time to debug, but Philip, do we really have to use these? If we place these outside the walls, we might draw walkers to the area. That's precisely for the enemy, the governor cut in, voice steel. Those prisoners are dangerous. Do you think they'll show mercy if they attack? Set the traps at once. No excuses. He clicked his walkie-talkie. Martinez, come to solitary and bring that thing with you. 10 minutes later, in a separate secret room, a young guard with curly hair sat hunched in a chair, shaking, fingers tangled. She had been the guard on the prisoner tonight. Her negligence had allowed the escape. I'm sorry, Governor. I didn't mean to, she stammered. Seeing Philip enter, she crumpled. Please, don't cast me out. My child is still here. He can't be without a mother. I'll accept any punishment. Just don't throw me away. Philip didn't respond with scorn. Instead, he took her by the shoulders with surprisingly warm hands. Don't cry. It wasn't entirely your fault. He looked at her not with reproach, but with an expression of trust and resolve. You did your best. The escaped prisoner had an inside man. You were set up. Relief and gratitude blurred her eyes into tears. Then how can I? Here's your chance to make amends, Philip said quietly, leaning in. I know what those people at that prison want. They intend to dismantle us from within. I need you to do something. What? Anything. I'll do anything to redeem myself, she begged. Philip explained without pity, but with a practiced gentleness. I'll make it look like your negligence led to the escape. I'll publicly exile you. You'll take that guilt and go to that prison as a refugee. Tell them you fled because I abandoned you. Get their trust, then stay there." Now, he produced a worn backpack from under the table and handed it to her. "There's a spare walkie-talkie sewn into the lining. I want to know their movements, especially when they plan to attack. You are our only inside. For your child, for Woodbury, we need you." She clutched the pack, determination replacing panic. "I will, Governor. I won't let you down." As she left through the back door, walking out in tears that were part gratitude, part fear, Philip wiped his hands as if clearing something filthy from them. A few subordinates who had been waiting at the door filed in. "Martinez, get the vehicle and weapons ready. I'm going out to meet those two bastards myself," Philip said, straightening his cuff. He looked to a quiet man in the corner and spoke in a low voice. "Make sure everyone sees her leave. Make it clear we exiled her. And once she's inside that prison, you know what to do." Understood. Block C prison, underground interrogation room. Lewis eased himself out of Hempot's mind and exhaled, heavy with the effort. He rubbed his throbbing temples and looked at the man lying in a deep coma across from him, raising an eyebrow. He had assumed that legitimacy required the target to be awake and alert. Instead, when Hempot's consciousness slipped and his mental defenses collapsed, probing his mind had been surprisingly easy. Credit for that went to Professor Tom. The dusty pages of Tom's lessons were often awkward in tone, but his mastery of legilimency was unmistakable. In half an hour, Louis had felt his skills sharpen. He could pick out fragments, images, and impressions from Hempot's subconscious. He had even hoped to try dragging Hempot's mind into Tom's diary so Tom could assist directly with the interrogation, killing two birds with one stone. Tom had refused flatly. "I am not a Pensieve," the old professor had said. "Nor am I a muggle rubbish bin. I don't have that function." Sigh. Louis sighed and put away his 15 in diary. "I still have to rely on myself. Damn, taking shortcuts is harder than I thought." His 13 wasn't very polished yet, but the practice had paid off. Besides confirming the governor's troop deployments, he'd pulled a crucial lead from Hempot's scrambled memories. There appeared to be a mysterious third force operating inside Woodbury. It wasn't proven, but when he compared those fragments to the original pattern, the indicator was strong. The enemy wasn't a single unified block after all. He closed his suitcase, stretched a stiff neck, and let the exhaustion of intense focus wash over him. That was enough for tonight. He'd sort through the rest later. He picked up the case and pushed open the heavy iron door of the interrogation room. The hinges creaked. A choking smell of cigarette smoke hit him as he stepped out. Merle leaned against the opposite wall, 2 or 3 cigarette butts at his feet, watching with an expression that said this was entertaining. "Yo finally decided to come out?" he drawled. Louis peered back into the room. Hempot was still tied to the chair, asleep. Merle sneered. "I didn't hear a sound in there. Thought you'd nodded off, kid. So? Any shocking secrets?" Merle clearly believed Louis could get nothing without torture. No screams, no confessions. Louis ignored the jibe. "I did find out a few things," he said calmly. Merle's smile froze. He straightened, sizing Louis up. "You're joking, right? Are hallucinogens really that useful?" "Mostly, Thurt is useful," Louis said with a straight face, letting the nonsense hang there. "Too bad you can't use it." Merle's mouth opened and closed, as if he had no reply. Finally, he waved a dismissive hand. "You'd better stop hanging around that Dr. Jenna. Look at the junk he's been feeding you. He's warped your head." Louis only smiled without arguing, picked up his case, and turned to leave. "This one's in your custody. Don't let him get away." 2 hours later, before dawn, a thin mist lay over the prison. Louis took the fragments he'd salvaged from Hempot and, with his previous map notes, turned them into a clear chain of clues in his notebook. When he finished, he snapped it shut, grabbed a thermos, and headed to the perimeter. On the watchtower, Rick stood wrapped in a thick coat, binoculars in hand, eyes fixed on the tree line. He hadn't slept either. His gaze was sharp, face bloodshot, a blue stubble shadowing his jaw. Louis climbed up and handed him the thermos. "Here, fresh." Rick unscrewed the lid and a strong aroma rose. He glanced at Louis, surprised. "Coffee? You onto something?" "You could say that." Louis leaned on the railing and looked into the gray distance. I pulled some more intel from that captive, was about to tell you. Rick's body went rigid. Wait. He stared toward the right edge of the woods by the gate. Someone's out there. Lewis fell silent and followed Rick's line of sight. A stumbling figure burst from the trees. A curly-haired woman with an old backpack, clothes torn and muddy, face streaked with grime. She looked exhausted, terrified. When she caught sight of the prison perimeter, she gasped and stopped dead. Guarding the wall were a dozen or more walkers, their arms and lower jaws crudely removed, chained to posts. Their mouths hung open in permanent, slavered gapes as they made low, hoarse sounds. The woman fell to the ground with a thud and scrambled backward on all fours, pleading, "Help! Please help me!" Below, Morgan and Morales, doing a patrol, raised their rifles and trained them through the inner wire mesh, aiming at the woman. "Stay right there! Hands where I can see them!" Across 2 layers of wire and a line of the mutilated walkers, Rick called out, "Who are you? Why are you here?" Between sobs, she explained, "I came from Woodbury." Her words tumbled out in fits. She said she'd been assigned to guard an exit that night. In a moment of mercy, she'd let 2 sick prisoners from the prison escape. The governor discovered the betrayal and punished her. He stripped her of weapons and drove her out through the walls, leaving her to survive among walkers. Knowing the enmity between the settlements and with nowhere else to go, she'd risked running to the prison, begging for sanctuary in exchange for her life. Rick descended from the tower and walked to the gate, his tone softening despite his caution. "You've been through hell." But as he listened, Rick's picture of the governor shifted. From Glenn's reports and other signs, he'd assumed the governor was cold, efficient, almost surgical. Yet here was a frightened, incoherent woman. Was this some clumsy cover? If she were an undercover operative, why send someone who couldn't even tell a consistent story? Rick wondered if the governor had become sloppy. Lewis, meanwhile, hadn't been idle. He watched the woman closely and scanned the woods. A shadow behind a thick tree, some dozen meters beyond her, caught his eye. Another person crouched there, clearly trying to remain hidden. Lewis narrowed his eyes, tapped Rick's arm, and tilted his chin toward the side gate. Rick understood at once. He kept his voice steady as he returned to the woman. "We'll let you in," he said. "But for everyone's safety, I need to take you to the 2 first." "Thank you." Relief flooded her voice as she scrambled to her feet. She kept looking at the chained walkers, trembling. "Please, can you let me in quickly? Being around those things, I'm terrified." 224. Complete the mission. Don't worry, as long as you cooperate. Rick gave Morales a quick, subtle look to tell him to stay sharp. He holstered his gun and stepped closer. "Hand over your bag first. We need to check it." At the request to inspect the backpack, the 5 froze, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Inside the bag was a walkie-talkie used to contact 11. It was tucked in a hidden compartment, and if it was discovered now, her mission would be ruined. There are only some changes of clothes in here," she stammered, hesitating as she took the backpack off and pushed it slowly toward Rick. When Rick grabbed the strap, she reflexively gripped the other end and wouldn't let go. For a moment, they were locked in a tug-of-war. "What's wrong?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "Is there something in there you don't want us to see?" While everyone at the gate focused on the bag, Lewis had already slipped through the bushes and crept toward the nearby oak. Before he could peer around the trunk, an irritated male voice carried through the leaves. "Damn it! What's going on? Why isn't it responding? Is the range too far? This piece of junk!" Louis froze. Through the gaps in the foliage, he saw a man in camouflage sweating behind the tree, holding a small black device pointed at the prison's gate. A cold dread shot through him. Louis didn't hesitate. He flicked his 24. Bang! A stone connected with the back of the man's head. The man didn't even groan. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed. The black device clattered into the leaves. Louis stepped out, grabbed it, and realized with horror it was a detonator. No! The possibility slammed into him. He spun and shouted toward the gate, "Run! That woman has a bomb on her!" Everyone at the gate froze. The Fiv looked utterly bewildered, clutching the strap and staring blankly at Louis. "Bo?" she whispered. Rick's reaction was instant. Trusting Louis, the second he heard bomb, Rick let go of the bag and sprinted backward, shouting, "Run!" Morales, Morgan, and the others broke into motion. Then, Boom! A blinding fireball erupted at the entrance to the prison. The explosion ripped through the morning, sweeping the woman's fragile form away and throwing Rick and several others who hadn't cleared far enough off their feet. Smoke and dust filled the air. Louis crawled free of the bushes, dazed from the shockwave, and scrambled toward the epicenter. Rick! The sight in the center of the debris was brutal. The air stung with burning and a metallic, sickly sweet tang of blood. The five was gone. Only a charred mark remained. A handful of people lay scattered, unconscious from the blast, cut and bruised but breathing. Closest to Louis, though, was Rick, lying in a spreading pool of blood, his back a mangled ruin with metal fragments embedded and blood soaking the soil. Louis's stomach dropped. Rick was bleeding out. There was no time to waste. Louis jerked a potion from his box, pried Rick's mouth open, and forced a bottle of 4 down his throat. Then he raised his 24 and waved it over the gory wounds. Scourgify. The invisible wash swept across the shredded skin. The dirt, gravel, and gunpowder residue vanished, leaving raw tissue exposed. Louis unscrewed the cap of the zero and, rationing carefully, dripped its contents onto the worst cuts. Green smoke rose as the flesh twitched and the bleeding slowed. It wasn't a full cure, but it bought time. By then, people from inside the prison had rushed out. Cough! Cough! What happened? Andrea, T-Dog, and others arrived, stunned at the scene. Dad! Carl cried, spotting Rick. He tried to rush forward. Don't go near him, Carl. Lori caught her son, tears streaking her face, and held him back. Don't crowd Louis. Let him work. Louis barked orders through the smoke. Al, take men and get the injured to the infirmary. Find Dr. Jenna and Herschel. Oscar, you and Jim seal the gate and patch the blast breaches. Daryl, take Robin and distract any walkers that get drawn here. Don't let them near the breach. Move. Slowly, despite the chaos, people snapped into action and followed his commands. Rick and the others were bundled onto stretchers and carried toward the infirmary as Louis kept working until the medics took over. Shane watched Rick being lifted and felt his head swim. He swallowed hard against a sudden wave of anger. What exactly happened? He demanded when he could. Louis nodded toward the man in camouflage he'd knocked out. A gift from SW11. A woman came here carrying high explosives. Her companion was hiding in the shadows to detonate her when she got close. Both Rick and I thought she was a defector. Turns out it was a suicide attack. Shane's face hardened. His knuckles whitened around the edge of the stretcher. He glanced at the unconscious captive, hatred sharp in his eyes. Louis, go to the infirmary and help the doctors. I'll handle this side. He patted Louis's shoulder, forcing himself to calm. Leave it to me. Keep a tight watch on that captive, Louis said. Don't worry, Shane replied low and dangerous. I'll make him suffer. Louis nodded and ran toward the infirmary. Louis, a hoarse voice called. It was Carl, Dwayne, and a few of the other kids, faces dusty and eyes red but quiet. Carl's voice trembled. Cough, will they die? Louis stopped, looked at them, and met Carl's gaze. Trust me, Carl, they'll pull through. The only ones who will die are our enemies. 10 minutes later, outside the infirmary. Quick, hemostat, someone shouted. His blood pressure is dropping. Give him a transfusion. The infirmary doors were shut tight, but the shouts inside cut through the air. Dr. Jenna, Herschel, and Louis had rushed in and were fighting to keep a life from slipping away. No one came out to report on the situation. Only Beth moved in and out with red-rimmed eyes, clutching blood-stained gauze. Outside, the defensive work was a race against time. The gap in the wire fence, ripped open by the blast, had been blocked by 2 heavy prison buses laid across it. Oscar and Jim, covered by others, led a team urgently patching small holes torn by the blast with wire and planks. Andrea, Aji, and the rest were fully armed, scanning the tree line with tight, vigilant eyes to guard against any follow-up attack or diversion. On the compound perimeter, 2 Harley-Davidsons rumbled in slow circles. A bird, Robin, chattered overhead, darting toward thicker clusters of walkers as if guiding them. Idiots! Look over here! Dinner's served! Merle bellowed, dragging a bleeding raw pig leg behind his bike so the scent trailed through the woods. He made a flashy show in front of the wandering horde, leading the walkers drawn by the explosion away from the camp. Daryl followed a short distance behind, crossbow at the ready, picking off any stragglers trying to flank his brother. Then a figure lurched onto the road ahead, disheveled, stumbling toward the compound with two snarling walkers close on his heels. "Someone's coming!" Daryl swore and jammed on his brakes. Merle squinted and his grin spread. "Yo, ain't that the Four Eyes kid?" The newcomer was indeed Pratt, gasping for breath. "Don't shoot! It's me!" he called, waving his hands. Merle leveled his rifle, the muzzle close to Pratt's head, his look hard. "Freeze!" he snapped. He sneered. "That broad who ran back crying earlier, then, boom, she blew up." "You could have been turned. Come back with a detonator stuffed in your crotch," Merle added. "What? What detonator?" Pointed at by the gun, Pratt paled and raised his hands, bewildered. "What are you talking about? I'm back with good news." "Good news," Merle scoffed, finger near the trigger. "Then talk fast." "Put the gun down, Merle," Daryl said, pushing the barrel aside. He fired a few bolts, dropping the walkers behind Pratt with precise headshots. He studied Pratt for a long, silent moment. After checking the man didn't have a backpack, Daryl said flatly, "As for you," he paused, then added, "Now, take off all your clothes." "Huh?" Pratt blinked, stunned. Sometime later in Block C's hall, Pratt sat curled in a chair, watching every grim face in the room and barely daring to breathe. When they had brought him in, the irony of his so-called good news felt cruel at the sight of the blast's aftermath. "That's the situation," he said, wiping sweat from his brow and speaking cautiously. "When we escaped, we weren't directly caught by the governor, but Michonne, the woman who ran with me, said this was the perfect chance to deal with him once and for all." He swallowed. "She said the governor's furious and will lead men to hunt us down himself, so she set an ambush at an abandoned factory on the road, hoping to use the terrain to take him out." Pratt hesitated and added, "Oh, Velos, the woman who met us, also asked me to pass a message to Dr. Jenna. She said hello." A stunned silence fell over the hall. Faces turned to one another, confusion, disbelief, and a strange, dark hint of absurdity on every face. Velos, the woman who sold medicine, was part of the remnants of the auto repair shop thugs. She might even have known Dr. Meng. Jenna? Everyone in the room knew it had been Rick's group that had wiped out that auto repair shop outpost. Now it looked like that group had pinned the blame on the governor. And worse, they'd used undercover operatives and poison to do it. Glenn stared, mouth slack. "What is this? Some kind of bad joke?" A nervous relief ran through the group, tinged with fear. If the auto repair shop people had targeted the wrong man, they'd been lucky. If not, the ones being stabbed and blown up could have been them. "So it's a misunderstanding?" Andrea muttered, complicated expression on her face. "But it's an opportunity." Shane came out from the hallway, his hands freshly washed of blood, but the murderous edge about him unchanged. "Even if Velos and her group hate us, they've shifted that hatred onto the governor," he said, scanning the room. "Judging by their methods, poisoning, undercover work, using others to do the dirty work, their direct combat strength is weak. They hide in the shadows and use tricks." He gripped his gun. "Right now, the greatest threat to us is still the governor." He turned to Pratt. "You said Michonne's lying in ambush. Do you remember the exact location?" "Yes, I remember," Pratt stammered. "It's by that road we passed before." "Good," Shane cut in. "Get ready. We leave in 10 minutes. Pratt's eyes went wide. "What? So soon? Is that necessary? Rick's still in surgery. People are hurt. And if the other group also hates the governor and even sent an undercover to mess with him, can't we just wait? Let them kill each other first. Wouldn't we be safer letting both sides exhaust themselves before we clean up?" "Stupid," Shane said coldly. "How long do you think that beautiful misunderstanding will last? It's a ticking time bomb. Don't forget, we were the ones who took out that auto repair shop and killed their people. They're only misled now. If Velos finds out the truth, we'll be facing not just the governor, but 2 groups of lunatics teaming up to kill us. So we have to crush the governor first and remove that threat before they realize what happened," Merle said with a cruel smile. "And now's the perfect time." Andrea stepped forward. "He just handed us a grand gift. He thinks we're in total chaos. Striking now is the last thing he'd expect." They all fell into agreement. Shane didn't waste words. "We're going to that ambush site immediately. If we don't catch the governor there, we'll march straight into Woodbury." He slapped Pratt hard on the shoulder, his eyes burning with revenge. "Grab your gun, Four Eyes." "When someone gives you a gift," Shane added, You always return it. 226. Factory War. I'm not trying to argue with you, Shane. Dale's voice was careful, but the worry was plain. Rick and the others are in a coma from their injuries. If you take off and the governor's men double back for a surprise strike, the people left here might not be able to hold the line. The best defense is a good offense, Dale. Shane spoke as he loaded rounds into a magazine. And I won't be taking our whole force. He slammed the clip home with a decisive click. Just one squad. Aji, Daryl, and T-Dog stay to defend. Dale exhaled, seeing Shane's mind was made up. Andrea stood silently behind Shane, watching. Fine. God bless you all. Be careful. Move out. Shane waved. He, Andrea, Merle, and a miserable-looking Pratt climbed into the vehicle. 20 minutes later, they stopped on the outskirts of the factory. The sky was a bleak gray blue. The early sun did nothing to brighten the clouds. From inside the dilapidated walls, the sounds of gunfire and the guttural roars of walkers already punched through the air. This is it, Pratt said, hunched in the passenger seat, his face pale. From the sounds of it, Michonne should still be inside. They might already be fighting. Shane stepped out, rifle at the ready, his eyes hard. Our goal's one thing, take the governor's head. He turned to Andrea and Merle, issuing orders fast and cold. That woman, help her if it doesn't interfere with the plan, but she's not our priority. Pratt, you know this place. Take Andrea and flank them from behind. Merle was leaning against the car, grinning as Shane looked at him. I'll hit that intersection, Shane added. Merle nodded toward the exit and said, Don't worry, I'll leave them a surprise. It has to be loud. It's a welcome home gift. Good. Shane lowered his voice and made the hand signal. Action. Inside the factory, belts and tangled pipes formed a maze. A crowd of walkers shuffled through the aisles, and among them, one figure was eerier than the rest. Michonne had pulled a dark hood low over her face. Rotting flesh and black gore clung to her clothes and arms, and the stench was sickening. She moved with the sluggish rhythm of the horde, blending in as she crept toward the governor's men ahead. 2 guards advanced cautiously. Shit, why are there so many walkers? One muttered. To avoid drawing more, he used a knife to quietly kill the walker blocking the path. He reached to finish off the hooded figure nearby, expecting an easy stab. The figure moved. Under the hood, cold eyes snapped up. The guard's pupils narrowed, and before he could shout, Michonne had dodged his knife. Her blade flashed. It cut the first man's throat and drove into the chest of the guard in front. She spun the blade and slammed it into the skull of another lunging walker. Before she could pull it free, a cold male voice came from behind. So you're here. Michonne whipped around and kicked the governor's gun free of his hand, but he didn't step back. He surged forward and smashed a knee into her abdomen. She doubled over with a grunt. He grabbed her dreadlocks and, using his size, shoved her against the edge of a rusted conveyor belt. Want to kill me? He snarled, strangling her, veins taut in his neck. Below the conveyor, a half-eaten walker crawled in the gap. The governor snarled and pressed Michonne's face down toward the creature. She clawed at his fingers, panic blurring her sight as the stench in the jaws came closer. Her hand brushed glass. Fingers closed around a shard. She swung it backhanded, aiming for his face. The governor howled, stumbling back, clutching his right eye as bright blood poured between his fingers. The wound wasn't deep enough to calm him. His remaining eye whitened with rage and pain. He snatched up his discarded handgun and fired at Michonne. The bullet struck the conveyor belt with a shower of sparks. Over here! Surround her! Someone shouted, and the commotion rippled through the factory. On a rusted maintenance platform above, a sniper had a bead on Michonne and was about to pull the trigger. Die, bitch! He whispered. A hand suddenly clamped over his mouth, and a blade sank into his back. The sniper's body went rigid, then twitched and slumped. Andrea pulled the dagger free, delivered a quick finishing blow, and propped the corpse at the scope to keep the sight steady. She peered through the lens at the chaos below and murmured, Next time, keep your eyes peeled. On the floor, 7 or 8 well-armed men were closing on Michonne, pushing her toward a dead end. It's over! Fire! Someone ordered. Then a burst of suppressive fire erupted from the flank. Shane jumped out from behind a container, the muzzle of his rifle flashing as he took 2 men down. Ambush! He barked. One of the guards panicked and ducked for cover. Shane moved from shield to shield, keeping the enemies' heads down. Michonne seized the chance, darting from her corner and beheading a man who was already sputtering with fear. "Governor, we're getting flanked," someone yelled. Hiding behind a massive chemical tank, the governor's face twitched with pain, his right eye streaming blood. For a second, he stared at Shane, incredulous, and then fury took over. "Hold them off," he barked. He forced himself to ignore the dizziness and grabbed a wandering walker, dragging it between him and the attackers like a living shield. Bullets chewed into the corpse, black blood sprayed. With the meat shield and his vest partially protecting him, the governor calmly raised his gun, aimed at an overhead pipe, and fired. Boom! The pipe blew. A hot, hissing gout of steam and chemicals erupted through the rafters, converting the controlled firefight into instant chaos. A pressure wave slammed into the room, sending loose debris and equipment spinning. Sparks and shrapnel flew, the chemical tank shuddered. Men were thrown off balance, some stumbling into the milling walkers. The factory filled with choking steam and the acrid bite of burning chemicals. The noise swallowed orders whole. Shane was knocked off his feet by the blast and slammed into a stack of crates. Michonne was thrown against a conveyor, winded and coughing, and the governor used the confusion like a mask, yelling, firing, moving through the smoke to buy himself time. Andrea, still on the platform, felt the blast in her bones. Through a haze of steam and dust, she centered her breath, squinted through the scope, and kept watching the chaos below. The battle had turned into a scramble, where the factory itself had become another weapon, and the only thing anyone could do was survive the next few seconds. 227. After effects? A pipe burst and scalding steam erupted, forming a white wall that slammed into the enemy's pursuit route. Shane was thrown back by the heat. Cursing, he retreated to avoid the worst of it. "Open that door," the governor snarled through the steam. "Let the things outside come in and play with them." His men smashed the side door, and dozens of walkers, drawn by the gunfire, shuffled into the factory. The scene devolved into chaos. Before slipping away, the governor turned and met Shane's gaze across the vapor-choked aisle. Even with one eye lost, there was no fear in his face, only cold, murderous intent. He made a throat-slitting gesture, then spun and drove the remaining team toward the trucks. "Get in the car! Now!" "Move!" Martinez yelled as he ran for the vehicles parked along the road. Then, absurd and jarring over the carnage, heavy metal blared down the street. Booms, claps, loud enough to make everyone look. A car, its doors flung wide, slid down the slope like a runaway beast and crashed straight into the convoy. The music drew nearby walkers, and they began to shuffle toward the noise. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted. Before the governor could react, the empty car smashed into their lead truck with a thunderous impact, blocking their retreat. Up in a tall roadside tree, Merle, who had been waiting, hummed along off-key to the music. Through his scope, he had locked onto the governor's head. "Gotcha, you bastard," he muttered and squeezed the trigger. Bang! The bullet was minutes from punching the governor's forehead when a panicked subordinate slipped and lunged past. The shot hit him instead. His head exploded in a crimson spray that splattered the governor's face. Shocked, the governor backed and ducked behind a car. "Shit!" Merle spat from the tree. "Did this son of a bitch step in a horseshoe? How lucky can you be?" "There, in the tree!" Martinez shouted, spotting Merle's position, and returned fire. Rat-tat-tat, bullets shredded bark and sent splinters flying. "Retreat! Forget the trucks! Run into the woods!" the governor barked. Realizing the situation had become untenable, if they lingered, the factory people and the walkers would trap them, he hauled his men into the dense cover of the forest, using the smoke and the horde as a shield. Merle fired 2 more times, dropping a slow-moving guard, but the governor still slipped away. Merle grinned, curling his lip into a bloodthirsty smile. Damn, slippery as a loach. Next time, he won't be so lucky. At the prison medical wing, after several hours of frantic surgery, the seriously wounded had finally been stabilized. Louis felt bone-deep exhausted. The travel, the all-night surgery, the need to keep razor-sharp focus had drained him. He wanted nothing more than to sit and close his eyes. A low groan came from the next bed. Morgan's eyelids fluttered. He opened his eyes slowly. "Morgan, honey, you're awake?" Jenny leaned over, surprised, taking her husband's hand. "How do you feel? Dizzy?" Morgan didn't answer. He stared at the ceiling, breathing fast. "He's burning up," Carol said, frowning as she checked his skin. "Is the wound infected?" Beth asked, ducking in to look. Suddenly, Morgan snapped. "No! Stay back!" he screamed, voice raw with horror, as if he were staring at a monster. He seized a pair of medical scissors from the stainless tray and lunged for Beth. Carol yanked Beth away just in time. "Morgan, stop!" Jenny lunged, trying to hold him. The struggle only made Morgan angrier. He swung the scissors wildly, strength shocking in its violence. Louis shoved through. Using Jenny's hold on Morgan, he jabbed a sedative into Morgan's neck. The drug hit fast. Morgan slumped back, unconscious. Beth hid behind Carol, trembling. What happened to him?" she asked. Louis leaned in, peeling Morgan's eyelids aside and pressing a hand to his hot skin. Bloodshot eyes, high fever, delirium, sudden aggression. "He's been poisoned," he said quietly. He pulled a small bottle of antidote from his coat and poured it down Morgan's throat. "Louis, something's wrong." Dr. Jenna came in holding a fresh blood analysis printout. "I tested the residue near Morales' wound. The bomb from earlier wasn't simple," she said, voice flat. "It was mixed with a highly volatile neurotoxin. The heat from the blast aerosolized it. Anyone nearby would have inhaled some. The compound causes extreme hallucinations and aggression." Louis finished. His gaze was hard. "And I think it's a variant of the red powder we ran into before." "Are you sure?" Dr. Jenna asked, surprised. "We haven't had time to do a full comparison." "I'm sure," Louis said. He wasn't claiming he knew the exact chemical makeup, only that the antidote he'd been using worked against most conventional neurotoxins. That and the symptom pattern matched. He nodded toward Morgan. "I just gave him the antidote. His temperature's already coming down." Dr. Jenna checked and, impressed, nodded. "It really is working." Louis pulled several more small bottles from his bag and handed them over. "Give these to Rick and the others who were exposed." "I will." The doctor didn't pry. She moved immediately to distribute the antidote. 15 minutes later, after everyone exposed had been treated and the worst of the delirium passed, the tense relief in the medical wing was almost audible. "That damn governor," Daryl growled when he returned from patrol and heard what had happened. He kicked a stool and spat on the floor. "Playing dirty again? Did he try to gas us all?" "Everyone, don't worry too much." Dr. Jenna pulled off his mask, glanced around at the group, and tried to ease their tension. If that toxin was inhaled from the air, the concentration would be much lower. As long as it didn't get into an open wound like it did with Rick and the others, the symptoms shouldn't be severe. Maybe some coughing or light dizziness for a few days. "That's true, but just to be safe." Louis took over, reaching into his bag and hauling out a large dark blue jar filled with a viscous blue liquid. Daryl frowned. "What's that?" "A byproduct of a homemade cleaner I mixed up earlier. Doesn't do much for stubborn stains, but it purifies air." Louis held the jar up. It was the all-purpose stain remover Harry had given him. At first, Louis had assumed it was just another cleaner. After reading the instructions and testing it, he discovered its primary use was stripping magical stains and residue. Its mundane cleaning power was middling, no match for a Scourgify spell, so he'd left it aside. Now its other property was exactly what they needed. As it evaporates, it can bind and remove harmful particles from the air. "Dilute it and put it in spray bottles. Spray the blast site and everywhere the smoke drifted," Louis instructed. "Especially around the main gate. That area needs to be disinfected thoroughly." "Okay, we'll do it." Miranda accepted the jar. Though curious about the blue liquid, she trusted Louis and pulled Laurie and the others to prepare spray bottles. Once they began, Louis didn't stand idle. He walked the prison's perimeter, checking the ongoing repairs to the fortifications. The explosion had drawn a lot of walkers, but with Daryl and Merle luring them and everyone else keeping them pinned with gunfire, the threat was under control. Back in the inner courtyard, Miranda and the others had already sprayed much of the diluted solution. The change was immediate. That sweet, metallic sting in the air that had been making throats itch vanished, and the intermittent coughing eased. Louis let out a breath and finally relaxed. He glanced toward where the captives were held, gathered his box of belongings and Tom's diary pages, and headed to another interrogation room. The man with the remote was still waiting. Sometime later, engines roared outside the prison gates. Shane's squad, smelling of gunpowder, rolled back in. As they climbed out of the vehicles, Merle inhaled deeply, an odd expression cutting across his face. "What happened?" he asked. He slung his gun over his shoulder and took another breath. His lungs, raw from the smoke, suddenly felt clearer. How did the air get so fresh? Andrea helped a limping Michonne out of the car and looked around, surprised. It was choking back there. It smelled like death. "That was Lewis," Herschel said, changing bandages for the wounded. "Dr. Jenna said there was toxin residue in the air. Lewis had one of those blue solutions, said it would purify the air. Looks like it worked. He's even got an antidote, apparently," someone added. Merle rolled his eyes. What can't this kid do? What was he before? Some kind of chemist or a Boy Scout leader? "He also helped rescue the earlier casualties," Andrea said, voice tight. "I can't imagine how many more people we'd have lost without him." "Maybe it's just talent," Pratt offered as he tended to Michonne's leg. Then, almost to himself, he added, "No wonder those medicine sellers were asking about him. If he keeps learning, maybe he could even make a cure for the one." The group went quiet. Shane, who was cataloging supplies, straightened and stared at Pratt. "What did you say? People are asking about Lewis? What do you mean?" Pratt hesitated. There'd been no time earlier to finish his explanation. The door creaked open then, and Lewis walked in. His face was a little grim. The prisoner he'd just interrogated hadn't had good news. Seeing Shane back, he wanted everyone prepared. "Shane, you're back just in time." Lewis poured himself a glass of water and wet his dry throat. "I just interrogated the detonator. The governor didn't put all his eggs in one basket." He set the glass down. "Looks like he's got bombs made, supposedly for traps, but I don't think it's that simple." He glanced around and stopped when he realized everyone's expressions had gone odd. "What's wrong?" he asked. "They're talking about those medicine sellers," Michonne said from her corner. Her leg was heavily bandaged, the wound from 13. "That woman, Velos, she knows your teacher." Velos. The name snapped everyone's attention to a point. Dr. Jenna, coming from the infirmary, froze as if struck. "You met Velos?" "Yes." Pratt rubbed the back of his neck. "She's the one selling medicines. She even asked us to send her regards." "Doctor, do you know her?" "Who is she?" someone asked. Dr. Jenna was quiet a long moment before he let out a heavy sigh. "A former colleague," he said finally. "Closer to my wife than to me, really. She was very capable. We worked together at the CDC for a while. She wasn't as talented overall as my wife, but in biochemistry she was a rising star." "Then how did she end up like this?" Louis pressed. Jenna's face darkened. "I don't know all the details, but it probably started with her son." He spoke slowly, the next words making him uncomfortable. "About 5 years ago, her son got into a fight back home in Philadelphia and accidentally killed a girl. Velos didn't call the police. To keep her son from going to prison, she used her lab clearance and chemical knowledge to make a powerful solvent. She went back to Philadelphia overnight, disposed of the girl's body, and destroyed the evidence." 229. Entering a dream. The sound of gasps echoed around the hall. "My God, that woman is crafty," Merle whistled, admiration flickering in his eyes. "She's a hard one to reckon with." "But the truth eventually came out," Jenna said, shaking his head. "There wasn't enough evidence to put her in jail, but she was expelled from the medical community and vanished after that." "I thought she'd left the field forever," Merle said. "I didn't expect that in this lawless apocalypse she'd release her talents even more fully." Jenna's expression turned serious as he looked around the room. "If that woman really is the pharmacist behind this, we need to be careful. She'd do anything for her son. And her skill with drugs, her knowledge is deep," Herschel added. Glenn raised his left hand, still not fully healed, and hesitated. "But we took care of her son at that auto shop earlier, right? So, this is good news?" Louis asked quietly. Silence fell. "Yes," Louis said, setting down his water cup. "This is good news. We removed one piece of filth, and now the lunatic mother is blaming another piece of filth," Shane said with a grim look. "How is that not better?" "At least for now, we don't have to deal with two crazies at once," Louis said. Shane nodded, though worry creased his brow. "The governor escaped. We wiped out his pursuit team and left him a souvenir on his eye, but he still managed to flee into the woods with some confidants," Shane said, frowning. The thought of that hidden danger gnawed at him. Lewis, you mentioned the bombs earlier. A hand suddenly settled on Shane's shoulder. All right, Shane. Dale walked over and cut him off with an unarguable tone. We'll wait until Rick wakes up to discuss those things. Right now, look at Lewis. He nodded toward Lewis, who was exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. This young man has stayed awake for a full day and night to save everyone. Even a man of iron couldn't keep this up. You need to rest, Lewis, Dale said firmly. And you too, Shane, and everyone else. But, Shane began, then Herschel stepped forward and patted his arm. As we often say on the farm, you can't shoe a running horse, Herschel said earnestly. If you don't stop and breathe, when real trouble comes, you'll only be a burden. Shane blinked, took in the tired faces around him, pinched the bridge of his nose, and sighed. You're right. Sorry, I was being impatient. He forced a half smile. There are walkers in the woods now, and that bastard's blind in one eye. We do have time to rest. He patted Lewis's shoulder. Go to sleep, Louis. Leave the rest to us. Lewis didn't try to be a hero. Judging by the situation, the governor wasn't likely to stroll back in with Lewis's head on a platter. Besides, he was exhausted. The bomb issue was important, but not urgent. Better to get some rest and avoid mistakes later. Before he lay down, he let Robin out. The owl tilted its head and blinked up at him. Robin, you'll have to stand watch tonight. Louis stroked the owl's feathers. Keep an eye on the perimeter, especially toward the woods. If you see anyone suspicious or any sign of the governor, wake me immediately. Robin looked sleepy and hesitated. Then Louis added, I'll double your rations later. At the word rations, Robin perked up, flapped its wings, and flew off to take up its post like a loyal sentinel. Only then did Louis collapse onto the bed. He'd barely closed his eyes when hurried footsteps pounded down the hallway, and Beth's voice rang out, frantic and searching for Herschel. Dad, something's wrong with Rick. Louis snapped awake, springing out of bed. He grabbed his suitcase, yanked open the door, and ran. I'll go check. In the infirmary, Dr. Rack, Jenna was feverishly checking Rick's pupils, beads of sweat on his brow. He's babbling nonsense, and his temperature's gone up again, he reported when Louis came in. Rick lay on the hospital bed, flushed and tense, his body twitching. He muttered incoherently, phrases like, I have no way and I'm sorry, slipping out as if he were trapped in a terrible nightmare. Is it a lingering effect of the poisoning? Louis asked, pressing his fingers to Rick's forehead. It was frighteningly hot. It shouldn't be, Dr. Jenna said, frowning. He's already been given the antidote. His vital signs are fairly normal, except for the fever. This looks more like a neurological fever brought on by a concussion or a stress response from psychological trauma, the doctor added, spreading his hands. The human body is complicated. I'm not a neurosurgeon, and our equipment here is limited. I can't be more definitive. Louis watched Rick struggle and fell silent for a moment. If science couldn't fix this now, he had one other option. Doctor, check on the others, Louis said suddenly. I'll stay with him. You? Jenna looked surprised. You haven't slept either. It's fine. I'll doze on the bed next to him. I can handle anything that comes up, Louis insisted. Jenna looked into his steady eyes and finally nodded. All right, but be sensible. Don't wear yourself out. After the doctor left, Louis closed and locked the infirmary door and drew the curtain. It was just him and the unconscious Rick in the dim room. Louis walked to the bedside, took out his wand, and murmured to himself, Sorry, Officer Rick, this is an emergency. I need to know what's wrong. He drew a deep breath, centered himself, and pressed the tip of his wand gently against Rick's temple. Legilimency. The spoken name of the spell hitched the air, and Louis felt a force seize his consciousness. It wasn't like skimming through fragmented images before. It was as if the ground dropped away and his whole body fell weightless. The sensation was the same as when he'd first plunged his mind into Tom Riddle's diary, surreal, sudden, and all-consuming. The infirmary's sharp smell of disinfectant dissolved into the dry, gritty scent of dust. The scenery twisted and reformed around him. When Louis finally found his footing, he was standing on an empty, silent highway that stretched off into the distance. No cars, no people, just an endless ribbon of road under a sun-bleached sky. This must be Rick's dream world. 2:30, soulful journey. The crisp clip of horse hooves cut through the heavy silence. Louis turned his head toward the sound and watched a figure ride past. Rick, wearing a clean, brand-new uniform atop a chestnut horse. He pulled the reins and stared at a solitary little house by the roadside. Someone had scrawled a desperate message across the most prominent outer wall in bright red paint. "Will God forgive us?" Even the wind seemed to stop. Rick stared at the words, frozen. Lewis watched, puzzled. Before he could make sense of it, rumble. The ground simply gave way. The solid asphalt became nothing, and Rick and his horse plunged into an endless darkness. The weightless fall didn't last. The blackness receded like a tide, and a white beam of light stabbed down from above, revealing the scene. The setting had snapped back to the abandoned factory where the man known as the Shepherd had been. Rick knelt in the center of the space, hands roughly bound behind him, his face streaked with dust, isolated and helpless. He was not alone. From the shadows, figures stepped forward, some faces decomposed, others looking as they had in life, faces that were painfully familiar to Lewis. "Look at you, Rick." The shepherd stood on a high, suspended walkway, looking down with a smile that was both compassionate and cruel. His voice, amplified by the echoes of the ruined building, thundered like a judgment. "You call yourself a guardian, the leader of your group, but your hands are stained with blood. Tell me, Rick, what is the difference between you and me? Peel off that layer of hypocritical skin, and you're nothing but a butcher." Rick opened his mouth, wanting to shout that it wasn't true, to roar his innocence. The words died in his throat. In that instant, the shepherd's accusation landed with an ugly truth he could not deny. "Rick." The sound of scraping filled the factory. Randall dragged himself forward, his leg torn and severed, a crimson trail marking his path. He hauled his broken body before Rick and lifted his young face, twisted with pain, eyes full of accusation. "Why didn't you believe me?" he rasped. "Would I really have led people to kill you? I was trying to go home. Why wouldn't you give me one chance? I was unarmed. My leg was broken. What threat could I have been to you?" Rick's face had gone white. He tried to answer, to explain. "No, I had to. I had to protect the others." "Protect," echoed a chorus. Pale-faced children, students Rick and the others had left in the basement in King County, surrounded him. They didn't speak. They stared with empty, dilated gray-white pupils. "Do people who make mistakes not deserve to live? We were so young, and you left us to wait for death." Cold hands landed on Rick's shoulders. The long-haired prisoner Rick had cut open in prison block C stood before him, and his split face hanging, blood running down his forehead. He grinned with a cracked smile. "Stop pretending, officer." He pointed to walkers emerging from the shadows, the believers Rick had shot, the small-time thugs from the pub, and many other blurry faces. "The world's unpredictable," the prisoner whispered like a demon in his ear. "You should have known that. From the moment you chose to swing the knife for survival, you stopped being human. Welcome to the club, brother." Before Rick could break free of the suffocating circle, the scene shattered like a mirror breaking into 1,000 shards. He was now locked in a narrow, claustrophobic room. Cold metal walls pressed close, no windows, only a single dim yellow bulb swinging overhead. "Ah, help, Rick!" Outside, a chorus of desperate cries. A woman's voice, Laurie's voice, and others rose in agony. Rick slammed against the iron door like a man gone mad. "Let me out!" The door did not move. His panic matched the pounding of his fists. Zzz, zzz, zzz. The loudspeaker in the corner crackled to life. Through the static, a familiar cold voice spoke. "You want to go out?" it asked. "Why?" "My family, my people need help," Rick shouted. "I have to help them." The voice on the speaker was indifferent. "We can only trust those who are truly trustworthy. We need to know whether you are worthy. Answer my questions. Ask whatever you want. Ask now." Rick wheezed, staring into the speaker. "How many walkers have you killed?" He froze, the answer automatic. I can't remember. Many." "And how many people have you killed?" Faces flashed through his mind like a revolving lantern. The believers, the 2 men in the bar, the thugs at the auto shop. He swallowed. "Many," he admitted, sweat sliding down his cheek. "Why did you kill them?" "To protect my family. To survive," he roared, as much to convince himself as the speaker. "We had no choice. If I hadn't killed them, we would have died." "No." The voice cut through him. Its words dug deeper than any physical wound. "You killed them because it was the easiest option. It's simpler to eliminate the person causing trouble than to deal with the problem itself, isn't it? Admit it, you enjoy having power over life and death." It doesn't matter if you kill the wrong person. As long as it's for survival, any crime becomes forgivable. Shut up, Rick bellowed. Laughter burbled from the speaker. Stop struggling. You've known for a long time. Whether it's the rotten meat outside us or us inside, there's no essential difference. And have you forgotten what you yourself said back on the farm? The voice pressed. In this apocalypse, we are already monsters. When the last words came, Rick finally realized the voice was his own. A click sounded. The iron door swung open. The cramped room gave way to a sunlit prison courtyard. A ragged survivor stumbled toward the gate, falling to his knees and pounding it. Help! Help me! Two small figures stepped from the gloom, Carl and Lewis, oddly expressionless. Their faces were blank, their eyes were cold as pools. Guns in hand, they raised them without hesitation. Bang! Bang! They fired in unison. The man seeking help crumpled in a spray of blood. No! Rick lunged out in horror, trying to stop them, but it was too late. He grabbed Carl by the shoulders, voice shaking. What are you doing? He asked for help. Why didn't you even ask? Carl turned, but the boy's eyes held no trace of childhood. Dad, he was a threat. His tone was flat. Carl's words hit Rick like a physical blow. Better to kill the wrong person than to let them go. Didn't you teach us that? Rick stood frozen, struck dumb. Lewis watched the unfolding fragments in the dream and finally understood what Rick was facing. This won't do, he thought. He hovered in the dream above Rick, who knelt on the verge of collapse, brows knitted. Lewis realized that while his interventions had pushed Rick to embrace the ruthless pragmatism that prevented the tragedies of his original path, the man's heart hadn't reconciled with that change. The cold behavior had torn a canyon through his once strong moral core. To preserve his image as a leader, Rick had bottled those conflicting emotions with no outlet. Now, with severe injury and medication as catalysts, the pressure had erupted like a volcano. Gotta do something, Louis thought, stroking his chin. If only I could make him see the consequences of the other path. 231, another possibility. Just as he thought that, ripples appeared in the dream world around them. In the next second, the frozen scene began to shift to match his thoughts. Louis's eyes widened in surprise, but there was no time to puzzle out how it worked. He looked at Rick, who still wore the weight of self-blame, and spoke deliberately. If that's true, then I'll show you. Let you see where another choice could have taken us. Herschel's farm at night was peaceful. Rick found himself standing on the RV roof, unable to move, only able to watch like a ghost. In this version, he hadn't killed Randall or left him to die. He'd trusted him, locked him in the barn, and planned to give him some supplies the next day so he could leave. Randall hadn't betrayed them. He hadn't told his companions where the farm was. But his furtive behavior and attempts to hide traces had still attracted the attention of a brutal group. The hunters had followed the trail and crept in. Who's there? Dale, patrolling near the RV with a rifle slung over his shoulder, had heard a slight movement in the grass and raised his gun. Figures stepped from the shadows, weapons in hand. Normally, Dale might have fired a warning shot, clear, decisive, and necessary. But because of Rick's merciful choice earlier that day, Dale had been more convinced than ever that people could still talk things through. He hesitated. Don't move. You are. A knife flashed from the dark. Dale clutched at his throat as his life spilled out. Flames leapt up. Gunfire, screams, and the grunts of walkers drawn to the blaze turned that peaceful place into a hell. The scene shifted. Rick found himself on burning grass, kneeling opposite Shane, whose face was smeared with blood and fury. Shane leveled a gun at Rick's head. Look what you've done, Rick, he roared. Randall, you let him go, and this is the result. Dale is dead. Herschel is dead. Because you wouldn't pull the trigger, you wanted to be a good man. Your weakness will kill everyone, Shane spat as he lunged. He forced Rick to raise his revolver. Kill me. If you've got the guts, just kill me. A single shot cracked. Shane fell. Before Rick could absorb the shock, the dream jerked again and another scene came forward. It was the basement in King County. He watched himself open a door and carry unconscious students back to the prison for treatment. At first it was beautiful. The young people healed, grateful, planting gardens in the open spaces, laughing at bonfires. The sound of youth seemed to color the gray world. But darkness breeds in bright places. Two malicious students hid in the boiler room and used chemicals to make hallucinogens. That sweet, cloying scent seeped into the prison's corners. A blonde girl leading the other children stood at the wire fence and told them, pointing at a walker beyond the perimeter, "Don't be afraid, they're people too. If we don't hurt them, we could be friends." The idea spread like infection. On a rainy night, the blonde took advantage of the storm to secretly cut the defensive fence. "Come in, friend," she coaxed, trying to let a friendly-looking walker through. Once the gap existed, more walkers slipped in. In the dark, withered hands reached. Rick watched as children were torn apart by the friends they had sought. The defenseless interior of the prison became a slaughterhouse. Images flooded faster and faster, fragments of different paths. In the factory, a moment of mercy let two of the shepherd's men go. 3 days later, they returned with heavy weapons and ambushed a supply team. Sophia's small body fell into a pool of red. Carol screamed. While clearing Block C, Rick had taken in Thomas and other prisoners, trying to reform them. During a walker horde, Thomas shoved T-Dog toward the walkers and slammed shut the door that should have been Laurie's escape. Blood, betrayal, death. Among the carnage were flickers of warmth, people saved, truly grateful, redeemed, and loyal afterward. But those sparks felt pale and insignificant against the mountain of corpses and the cost paid in pain. Then the noise and fire faded. The world went quiet. Rick sat in a long corridor smelling of disinfectant, King County Hospital, where it had all begun. He wore the familiar hospital gown, leaned tired against a bench, hands clasped. His eyes held a calm that came from having been through so much. "Did I sleep a long time again?" he asked, staring at the sunlit window. Lewis appeared beside him on the chair, relaxed. The two sat quietly, sharing the peace. Rick looked at his hands, clean, slender, unbloodied in the dream, and spoke as if naming an old hurt. "Since the apocalypse started, I've killed a lot of people," he said. "I wake sometimes in a cold sweat because I always remember their faces, the people I killed. I thought I was right. I thought I couldn't risk others. But if I'd been more capable, if I'd thought of more ways, would things have had a better ending?" He paused, then shook his head. "Do you know what's the worst part? Even when I ask myself if I'd make different choices if I could go back, the answer never changes. I don't regret the decisions I made." Lewis listened without surprise. Rick's voice tightened. "Maybe I've lost my humanity. Maybe I'm no different from a walker, like I always feared. If this is the only way the rest of you can live, if my choices are what keeps you alive, then that's okay. I'm not a god. I can't save everyone. If I can't protect everyone, I can only protect the people who matter most to me." Louise leaned back, stretching. "Walkers don't brood over their actions. Only humans do that," he said softly, smiling at Rick. "And I don't think anyone would complain about you. After all, we're still alive." Rick let out a laugh that scattered the gloom from his face. "Yeah, we're still alive." Louis' figure began to become translucent in the sunlight. "Then stop sleeping, officer," he said. "There are people waiting for you." Consciousness rose slowly like bubbles from the deep. Images flashed, an open highway, warm sun, two people on a bench. Rick opened his eyes, foggy at first. Laurie sat at his bedside, fingers tight around his. Carl slept curled in a chair across the room. On the next bed, Louis, hair mussed and blonde, yawned and rubbed his eyes as if he'd been awake for a while. "Rick, you okay?" Louis asked. Rick squeezed Laurie's hand, feeling the familiar warmth, and managed a steady smile. "I'm fine. Thank you, Louis," he said. For Woodbury. Woodbury. Philip's room. The lights were off. Only a row of enormous aquariums along the wall gave off a faint, eerie glow. The governor sat on the sofa with a glass of whiskey, staring at his collection. In murky water, several human heads in various stages of decay bobbed slowly with the current. Their mouths hung open. Their hollow eyes seemed to replay the terror of their final moments. At the far right of the tank floated a fresh head, the boy who had played with a butterfly knife in the interrogation room and later guided Pratt. His eyes were a dull, lifeless gray. "To you, child," the governor said, and lifted his glass in a small toast. "What a pity. You had so much potential." He drained the last of his whiskey, stood, and took a tray of dripping raw meat from nearby. Walking toward the inner room, he pushed the door open and was immediately met with the sound of chains and low growls. In a corner, A girl turned walker in a dress was chained up. At the scent of fresh meat, she thrashed and lunged toward him. Shh, Petunia, good girl. Daddy's here. The governor removed her hood without hesitation. Beneath it was a festering, ravaged face consumed by hunger. Are you hungry? Here, eat. He used tongues to bring a piece of raw meat to her mouth. Petunia bit down with a screech as her teeth scraped the metal. Black, foul blood ran from her lips. When the governor reached out to stroke her withered hair, she snapped and nearly bit his fingers. He did not get angry. After feeding her, he pulled his hand back and replaced the hood gently, obsession and tenderness warring in his eyes. Don't be afraid, Petunia. He kissed her forehead through the cloth. Daddy will fix you. Once those bad people outside are dealt with, Daddy will bring the best doctor and cure you. He left the room, smoothed his collar, and opened the door to the underground lab. Milton was hunched over a table, poring over a dense, complicated defense map. At Philip's entrance, he straightened in a hurry. How are the preparations coming along? Philip walked to the table and scanned the annotations. Everything's set up, Milton said, wiping cold sweat from his brow. He pointed at the blueprints. We've planted most of the charges and laid out Molotov traps. If they try to force their way in, they'll pay a heavy price, Philip said. Milton's shoulders sagged and he looked down, torn. But Philip? His conscience finally overcame fear as he stared at explosives that could level large parts of Woodbury. He swallowed hard. Do we really have to go this far? Turn the whole town into a battlefield? There are civilians here besides the fighters, Milton went on. Old people, kids, women who've never held a gun. If a fight breaks out, the consequences will be terrible. Since you're so sure the people from the prison are coming, maybe we could try to warn them off? Or talk? Maybe it's a misunderstanding that could be resolved. Milton. The governor cut him off and sighed, as if bewildered by the other man's naivety. Do you think I want any of this? He looked at him with disappointment. I want to send them away too, but where would they go? Outside is crawling with walkers and wild dogs. What's the difference between letting them leave the safety of our walls and sending them to their deaths? Or do you want to hand them over to those thugs from the prison as hostages? He put his hands on Milton's shoulders. As for negotiating, he gave a cold laugh and tapped at the hollow where his right eye had been. They poisoned our people, stole our supplies, and blinded me. If you went out there begging for mercy, do you honestly think they'd let us go? I don't think they would, Milton murmured, head bowed, voice trembling. I'm sorry. So we have no choice. Philip leaned in, his tone hard. Use your head. If we send away the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled, what reason would the remaining soldiers have to fight to the death? Milton's face registered the logic like a chill. Their wives, children, parents are all here. Only this way, when the enemy comes, will they become the most ferocious beasts because they'll have nowhere left to retreat. Philip patted him on the cheek. Get the preparations done. Don't disappoint me. 10 minutes later, the central plaza of Woodbury was full. Everyone's waiting for you, Philip, Lily said from the bottom of the steps, worry in her eyes. He took a deep breath and stepped up onto the platform. He wasn't wearing an eye patch. The raw wound was on display, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I know you've seen it, he said, pointing at his missing eye. I failed to bring back the scouts. That was my failure. The crowd murmured. Someone sobbed. Philip looked at them, weary and angry. I know you're afraid. I am too, because our enemies live in the prison. They are a pack of beasts. His voice rose. They poisoned our people before. While I was trying to negotiate peace, they ambushed us with despicable tricks. Now they know where we are. What do you think they'll do when they get here? Invite us to tea? He scanned the fearful faces below the platform. No, they'll steal the little food we have left, burn the houses you built brick by brick, rape our wives and daughters, and throw our children to the horde for sport. Some suggested I run, suggested I abandon this place. He slapped a pistol down on the lectern, but I said, no. This is my home. This is the sanctuary I built with my own hands. I'm not leaving. I'd die right here. I will never hand it over to those bandits. If they want Woodbury, they'll have to step over my corpse. The gate is open for anyone who wants to go. Go be food for the walkers outside, or go be slaves to those thugs from the prison. But if you want to live like a man, like a human being, pick up your weapons and fight to the end." He drew a black pistol from under the table and held it high. "Even if I have only one breath left, I'll drag them to hell with me." "Now tell me," he roared, "do you want to live on your knees or die on your feet?" The torch and oar rhetoric ignited the crowd. Fear turned into anger, and the instinct to protect their home drowned out reason. Someone shouted first, then others joined with a rolling wave. "Let's fight! Kill them all! Defend Woodbury." For Woodbury. Below the platform, men and women raised rifles, shotguns, and other weapons. Soldiers, too, picked up guns, ready to die before surrendering. In the shadows, the corner of the governor's mouth curled into a small, cold smile. Good. This was his strongest wall. Prepare for war. I woke up from my deep sleep. The prison, Block C conference room. Rick's face was still a little pale, but he was back to himself mentally. He sat at the head of the long table while Miguel and Al, just returned from a scouting run, gave their reports. "The situation isn't good," Al said. He spread a map across the table and pointed to several red circles. "Woodbury's outer defenses have suddenly been tightened. We also found freshly disturbed earth on the main road and at several key intersections. Looks like explosives buried in the ground." "That matches the intel Louis pulled from the 13 earlier," Miguel added. "That guy called Levin is planning to turn the whole town into a minefield this time." Everyone's faces went stern. No one backed down, but the prospect of heavy casualties made them uneasy. Captain Brady, who'd been sitting off to the side, spoke up quietly. "Rick, you helped us clear out the trouble at our camp last time. Now it's our turn to help you." "Give me a break, soldier boy," Merle sneered before Rick could respond. "What can you do? You couldn't handle a few fuss 14Es. We had to come and wipe your asses for you. You planning to be our cheerleaders? Or you gonna scream and scare the walls down for us?" The soldiers behind Brady bristled, ready to react, but Brady raised a hand and ignored Merle's taunt. He went on, calm and deliberate. "We don't have many people, but we have some equipment you might use. We have an M60 tank. Not many shells, but it's still operational." "A tank?" Merle froze. Brady smiled at Merle's reaction and added, "And we have a helicopter. Fuel's limited, but for air support or fire suppression, it should work." Silence dropped over the room. Even Shane and Daryl were stunned. Merle's face changed the moment the implications hit him. "Jesus, why didn't you say something sooner? Since there's a tank, why are we still here talking tactics? Drive it up and crush that Cyclops and we're done." "Cough, Merle." Louis stepped in at the right moment, looking at Merle with a strange half-smile. "That 13 was screaming earlier, saying there's a psychopathic murderer inside 12 who's actually a mole planted by 11. He paused, appraising Merle. "From the description, it sounds a lot like you." "A mole?" Merle barked a laugh of anger, rolling up his sleeves as he pushed out the door. "I'm gonna go have a little chat with him and show him what happens when you slander a psychopath." He clapped Brady on the shoulder. "We'll talk later." As Merle stomped away, everyone in the room let out a quiet, simultaneous breath. If he'd kept talking like that any longer, they worried he'd anger this newly offered ally enough to make him switch sides. Rick stood and extended his hand to Brady. "Thank you." Brady shook it and smiled. "We're helping ourselves too, Rick." After they saw Brady and his men off to move the heavy equipment, the mood in the room shifted back to planning. Shane crossed his arms, frowning. "There's another threat besides 11. That woman, Velos, and her people, Pratt had warned before. The woman selling medicine everywhere who also had her own plans to deal with 11. Last time we were lucky, their hatred got redirected toward 11 by bad info, so they became de facto allies. But an alliance born of a misunderstanding is fragile. And you've seen how they operate: poisoning, misinformation, assassination by proxy. Those women are dangerous." A hard edge flashed in Shane's eyes. "We need to find out how many of them there are and where they're hiding. Once we deal with 11, we can't let those lunatics roam anywhere near our territory." "Leave that to me or Dr. Jenna," Louis said after a moment. "To them, Dr. Jenna and I could pass as one of their own. That's an information gap we can exploit." He thought, privately, that if Dr. Jenna refused to cooperate, his legitimacy wasn't just for show. He could pry information out of them if necessary. One more thing about Bout 11. Luis moved to the map, piecing together the 13-ounce memory with what he knew from the original reports. The governor's greatest weapon is his lies. He's been deceiving the townspeople, painting us as monsters who kill, burn, rape, and pillage. He tells them that if they don't resist to the death, we'll massacre the town. That's how he keeps them so devoted, he said. If we can find a way to expose his lies, let the residents see Levin's true face, we might be able to collapse their defenses from within. Marge nodded thoughtfully, then sighed. It's possible, but I don't know if it will work. I've seen fanatics brainwashed by people like the shepherd. Once someone falls into that frenzy, they twist the truth into enemy lies instead of listening. We can try, but don't get your hopes up. Luis agreed. Brainwashing was a closed loop, hard to break from the outside. He thought, ruefully, if only I'd learned the Imperio curse. I could force 11 to confess, or if I had Polyjuice, I could take his place and put on a show. In the original, the brainwashed residents had a brutal end, coerced into attacking 12, then, after failing, gunned down on the way back by 11 in a rage. If there was any way to end this with less bloodshed, he'd take it. But wishful thinking would not win the day. They had to prepare for a hard fight. They hashed out tactics for a long time. When the details were set, the room quieted and every eye turned to Rick. This would be Rick's first formal action since waking, the biggest crisis 12 had faced. His gaze swept over the group, as if he were reacquainting himself with the family who had shared life and death with him. Everyone's had a rough time these past days, he began. From Glenn and Daryl being attacked to this bombing threat. People got hurt. Some came close to dying. This is my fault. Rick, Shane started, but Rick raised a hand to stop him. He leaned forward, both hands on the table. When we came to 12 and cleared out the Fort Fiendhines, I felt relieved for the first time in a long while. A long stretch of calm, and these high walls gave me an illusion. I thought we'd finally be safe, that we could rest and not have to live like animals, making ourselves bloody just to survive. I tried to find a safe place in this chaotic world, pretending threats didn't exist. I thought if we didn't take in strangers and didn't provoke anyone, trouble wouldn't find us. But I was wrong. Rick's eyes sharpened. The dead and the living don't stop their footsteps just because we want to live in peace. He looked at Louis and then at Shane. I laid my gun down thinking I could pass the responsibility on, but someone had to hold the gun for me. The responsibility I should have borne didn't vanish. It landed on all of you instead. Thank you. Shane's worry broke into a grin, and he punched Rick in the chest. You never have to thank me, brother. Rick nodded and went silent for a moment, then spoke to everyone again. I used to have a long dream. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip and drew it. With a crisp click, he chambered around. He looked up, eyes burning. But the good news is... He raised his voice until it filled the room. I have woken up. 234. Specialized zombies. After the pre-war meeting ended, Cell Block C sprang into action. People dispersed, each checking weapons and counting ammunition, preparing for the coming battle. In the tactics room, Jim didn't leave. He stood alone in front of the map, staring at the circled Woodbury, his brow furrowed. Glenn and T-Dog, who were moving supply crates, exchanged a look, set their boxes down, and walked over. Hey man, what's up? Glenn asked. T-Dog clapped Jim on the shoulder, half joking. You look terrible. Don't tell me you have another ominous premonition? Jim blinked and came back to himself. He nodded slowly. The smiles on Glenn and T-Dog's faces disappeared. They grew serious. Jim's instincts had been right before. I feel. Jim stared at the map, his voice distant. Woodbury's in for trouble. Huh? Daryl, passing with his crossbow on his back, heard and replied dryly, Doesn't that mean everything's going our way? You made it sound so gloomy, I thought we were the ones who were doomed. Jim tore his gaze away from the map and shook his head. I don't know. I just have this weird feeling, like something's watching that place. But it's just a premonition. It might be wrong. Don't take it too seriously. Even if you say it might be wrong. Glenn rubbed his chin and thought aloud. Given how things have gone, it's probably smarter to be cautious. Your gut's rarely off. Could it be the remnants of that group from the auto repair shop? T-Dog said, worry in his voice. That woman leader was slippery. Maybe she found something and is planning to move on us? It doesn't feel like that. Jim frowned. The feeling was vague. He couldn't put it into words, so he sighed. Forget it. I won't dwell on it. No matter what, we follow Rick and do our jobs. Elsewhere, Rick found Lewis, who was sketching a route map. Rick kept his voice low. Lewis, what about that mole you mentioned? Merle went after him, then came back saying the guy was already dead. Louis blinked and put on an innocent expression. Yeah, I just wanted to get Merle out of the way so his big mouth wouldn't scare off any allies. As for the mole, he hesitated, then continued. The governor did want to send someone in as a mole. But according to the Puffswelf, that poor bastard died before he even reached the prison. Dead? Rick frowned. Wait, we've all seen him, Louis nodded. At the car crash site near Leven, the old man trapped in the driver's seat who turned into a 13. We found a map on him. Rick's face cleared as he put the pieces together. So it was him. Just then, Oscar hurried over, carrying the drawing covered in lines, the bomb schematic Louis had drawn from the 12's memory. Rick, we have a problem, he said. He pointed to the drawing, his face grim. I've studied this bomb's structure. Even with a tank, look here. He tapped the detonator on the sketch. This design doesn't look like a pressure-triggered landmine. It's more like a crude, remote-triggered device. So can we still use the tank to clear the way? Rick asked. There's risk, Oscar said. These homemade explosives would have trouble punching through an M60's frontal armor, but the tank's tracks are vulnerable. If someone detonates one right under the tracks, the tank will be disabled. What's worse, Morales added, nodding, we have to advance with the tank. If we don't clear these hazards first, once the melee starts, even if the tank's okay, the people walking beside it will be hit. Don't forget, Morales continued, his voice low, when these things went off before, there was poison. Since Naim is willing to use his own men as human bombs, he clearly doesn't care about others' lives. He might use the same tactic again. Oscar's expression was hard. Rick studied the drawing, thinking, we need to find a way to detonate or disable these bombs before the attack. Since 9 likes using 13 teens so much, Louis said suddenly, tapping the outer area of the drawing, why don't we learn from him? Rick looked up and met Louis's deep blue eyes. He understood instantly. You mean, use 13S to scout the path? Exactly, Louis smiled faintly. We're not exactly short on those things around here. It's a war. Let them lead for us. Time passed. Late that night, outside Woodbury, searchlights swept across the high walls. Guards gripped their rifles, nerves taut as they peered into the black woods. Over there, movement. A 4 whispered, nodding toward shadowed trees near the wall. In the darkness, several swaying figures advanced toward the defenses with slow, stiff steps. There, 13s. A woman with a ponytail squinted to make sure. To save ammo and avoid revealing their positions, she picked up a compound bow leaning against the wall and notched an arrow with practiced fingers. The bowstring hummed as the arrow flew toward the lead 13's forehead. Just as the arrowhead was about to strike, the 13 seemed to step on something and stagger to the left in an awkward, uncoordinated way. The arrow clipped its rotting ear and buried itself in a tree trunk behind it. The woman paused, eyebrows lifting. Lucky shot, she muttered. Probably a broken leg, the 4 said, dismissive, chewing gum. Shoot another. She loosed another arrow, but the 13's upper body suddenly leaned back, perfectly avoiding the attack. Both watchers' expressions changed. Did you see that? The woman said, lowering her bow, uncertain. That thing, it just dodged me. Something's not right. The 4 spat, then reached for the detonator at his waist, hesitating. Do we call 9? Or is this some one-time fluke? Before they could decide, the 13 executed a move that shattered their expectations. It went from standing to slamming its whole body onto the ground with a sickening smack. Then, as if yanked by an invisible hand, it slid forward 3 or 4 meters along the earth at unbelievable speed, and in a blink snapped upright, standing straight less than 10 meters from the defensive line. The motion, a series of impossible, smooth maneuvers, left both of them frozen. Damn it! That's definitely not a walker. 6's face had gone ashen, as if she were trying to convince herself. That's a person, right? It must be those people from the prison playing tricks. She dropped her compound bow, grabbed the rifle slung across her chest, and fired at the figure sliding toward them. The muzzle flared. At that range, bullets thudded into the thing, black blood spraying out. But something chilling happened. The figure, hit multiple times, didn't fall. Its body convulsed then with the sound of grinding bones, folded backward like a pocket knife, and continued to slide toward them. Ah! The sight broke the bald man's resolve. Fear washed over him and clouded his judgment. Don't let that ghost thing get close. He stopped hesitating and stabbed the red button in his hand. Boom! An explosive buried on the perimeter detonated. Flame leapt into the sky, and the shockwave shredded that agile walker to pieces. Only when severed limbs flew and black blood splattered the ground did the two of them let out a trembling sigh of relief. Is it dead? Six leaned forward to look. In the firelight, she saw only rotten flesh and black blood, no sign of anything living. Her mouth opened, her eyes dull, her heart hammering, about to whisper, "Thank God." Before she could fully exhale, though, another phantom figure slid out of the smoke and flames still hanging in the air and started sliding toward the base of the wall with the same eerie speed. No, there's another one. Boom! At the same time, elsewhere in the town, massive explosions like thunder stole everyone's attention. What's going on? An explosion to the south? Are they attacking from there? Guards on the walls glanced toward the flames, then heard the dry snapping of branches in the woods around them. Walkers appeared from every direction, 10, 20, dozens, lumbering forward. These ones didn't move with that strange agility, but to people already pushed to their limits, the steady, oppressive shuffle was enough to choke them. Damn it, they're everywhere. Seeing the horde gathering, the civilian guards on the walls lost their nerve. They want to use the walkers to pin us inside. That night, Woodbury was not going to sleep. Dawn only came when the horizon went pale. The governor stood on the wall with deep, dark circles under his eyes and said in a low voice, "This is their tactic." Martinez ground his teeth beside him, spent shell casings littering the ground. They're making noise to attract walkers, trying to wear out our ammo and our manpower. Then why are we still shooting? A young guard blurted, voice shaking. We could ignore them, let the walkers surround the wall. They'd be a natural defense. Idiot, Martinez snapped. If we ignore them, they'll just keep making noise and draw more of those things here. By the time thousands of walkers are around us and it's impassable, even if they don't kill us directly, we'll starve or drown from cut-off supplies. The young guard's lips trembled. He said no more. The governor didn't take the bait. He stared hard toward the woods to the south, concealing a suspicion he didn't voice. The southern guards had reported walkers that dodged bullets and had even detonated precious explosives in panic. He didn't believe walkers could mutate. He suspected psychological warfare or some kind of hallucinogen. Don't waste any more worry on those corpses. Pushing his doubts aside, he ordered, "Tell everyone to stay sharp. This isn't over." Just then, the ground began to vibrate, tiny pebbles dancing on the concrete. What's happening? People crouched behind sandbags, hands over their heads, eyes wide. Everyone glanced down the main road. The mist lifted, and a steel beast rolled into view, crushing the pavement. The dark muzzle of an M60 main battle tank glinted coldly in the morning light, aimed straight at Woodbury's gates. The crowd all inhaled as one. They looked down at their weapons and Molotovs, then up at the behemoth. A helplessness spread through them. "Those are the prisoners from the prison," someone whispered. "How do they have a tank?" The M60 idled 100 meters from the gate, its tracks grinding to a stop. But contrary to what the terrified residents expected, the other side did not open fire or issue threats. In the hush, a voice carried over. Rick's voice, amplified through a megaphone, reached every ear on the walls. "Residents of Woodbury, listen. My name is Rick Grimes. Before the disaster, I was a 5. He gave his name calmly. "I learned from those who attacked the prison that 9 told you there are demons and bandits living there. But I am standing here now to tell you, he is lying. We are not the aggressors claims we are. We are just like you, ordinary survivors who have made the prison our home in this damn apocalypse. Among us are the elderly, children, and wives waiting for their husbands to come home. In fact, it is your governor who started this. He told you we are bandits committing every evil imaginable. But real bandits wouldn't drive a tank out here and then stop to negotiate. They wouldn't give you a choice. Because we know many of you have been blinded by lies, we don't want to kill innocent people if there is another way. He deceived you. He attacked our home for his own gain and murdered our people. We just want to stop it. Lay down your weapons and hand over 9. I promise you, as long as you don't start shooting, we will not harm any civilians. No one needs to bleed anymore for that liar's ambition. Rick's tone was sincere, and what he said made sense. The previously fervent crowd wavered. Many people lowered their muzzles and looked at one another. Don't listen to him. 9 barked, not panicking. He drew a pistol, fired a shot into the air, and roared. It's a trick. They don't want to waste shells or damage the spoils. If you let them in, they'll massacre us. Think about how they treated our scouts. These people want to kill us all for the least cost. The governor, eyes bloodshot, pointed at the tank. We have no way back. If you don't want to die, fire. A few loyalists, already primed by his rhetoric, pulled their triggers. Bang! Bang! Bullets pinged off the tank's frontal armor, producing only sparks and scuffed paint. The last trace of pity in Rick's eyes vanished. He put down the megaphone and spoke into a walkie-talkie with cold precision. Attack! On a rooftop inside Woodbury, Lewis, who had used the 4 to infiltrate the town, crouched like a ghost. He heard the signal over his radio, watched the chaotic crowd below, and allowed himself a small smile. Copy that. The bomb fuses on the southern main road have been cleared. The road is safe, he reported, glancing toward the other side of town. And I just opened a gap in the western wall. Shane and the others are already inside. 236. Double game on Rick's command, the M60 rolled straight into Woodbury's gates with unstoppable force. The metal screamed as the tracks crushed the barrier to pieces. Dust billowed everywhere. Kill them! Martinez roared from behind cover and opened fire. Even faced with a tank, the townspeople, driven into a corner by fear and lies, didn't immediately run. Their exits were cut off. They believed surrender meant certain death. Desperation turned to madness as a hail of gunfire erupted, sparks and debris spraying into the air. Shane and Daryl led the assault team through a breach in the wall and were instantly locked in brutal hand-to-hand fighting with the defenders. Smoke and the staccato of gunshots filled the streets. Rick pushed through the chaos with his rifle up, ignoring stray bullets. His eyes fixed on a figure fleeing toward the administration building. The governor! He shouted and charged, bursting through a half-open shop door toward the man trying to escape out the back. They collided, sending a glass counter shattering as they crashed into a derelict grocery store. The governor reacted instantly. A shot screamed past Rick's ear, scattering wood splinters. Rick drove his knee into the man's stomach and knocked the gun away. They tumbled and grappled among broken glass and fallen cans. Dull thuds of punches echoed in the narrow aisles. Is that all you've got, Rick? The governor laughed, even after Rick landed a fist that split the corner of his lip. He grabbed a shard of glass and slashed at Rick's throat. Rick trapped his wrist. Look outside. Your people are pinned down. The governor snarled, eyes wild. Did you really think you could win? I'm not just here to win, Rick growled, forcing the governor's wrist outward until it hurt. I'm here to end this, once and for all. End it? Ha! The governor's smile didn't fade. He headbutted Rick, and when Rick staggered, the man flipped over, pinning him and wrapping his hands around Rick's throat. You didn't really think Woodbury only had those civilians out front with Molotovs, did you? At almost the same moment, behind Block C of the prison, the early morning mist still clung to the lawn. As the governor boasted, Lily's elite squad had already crept up, silent as ghosts. Just one old-timer, a burly man whispered, hiding behind a tree as an elderly figure bent to pick wild berries. Take him alive, Lily said coldly over the radio. We need hostages. Copy, the man hissed, and he lunged through the grass toward the old man's back. Inside the grocery, Rick was nearly suffocating when he grabbed a picture frame from a nearby shelf and smashed it over the governor's head. The glass exploded. The governor cried out, his grip loosening. Rick kicked him free, scrambled up, and gasped for air, blood at the corner of his mouth. You don't know me, Rick spat, landing a punch as the governor struggled to his feet. You didn't think the people I brought here were all of us, did you? Outside, the thug who'd leapt at Herschel never made it across the grass. A sharp report split the air. Before he could touch the old man's shoulder, a bloom of blood erupted from the attacker's head. He collapsed face first into the mud. A young National Guard soldier stepped out from behind a tree, blew the smoke from his muzzle, and grinned at Herschel. All done, Mr. Herschel. I took care of this guy. Get down, Herschel barked. The soldier froze and crouched. Herschel swung his rifle and fired, blasting the head off a walker that had been stalking up behind the man. The soldier swallowed hard and stared at the corpse. I'm a farmer, child, Herschel said smoothly as he holstered his piece and patted the young man's shoulder. But that doesn't mean I don't know how to hunt. Back in the grocery, the governor shook his head to clear the stars from his vision. He grabbed Rick by the collar and slammed him into a shelf. Cans and boxes rained down. Your people? He sneered, raining 2 heavy blows into Rick's face. You mean the old men who can barely walk? The women who only know how to scream? Those prisoners who don't even dare pull the trigger? You thought leaving a few guards behind would keep you safe? He ripped Rick's hair and pressed his face into the broken glass. His voice went ice cold. My elite squad will cut through your defenses like a knife through butter. When they return, I'll turn your son's head into a trophy for my fish tank. The governor's right, someone shouted outside the prison perimeter. A tall, burly thug peered toward an empty guard post and howled with excitement. No one's defending this place. Move faster. 2 modified trucks roared to life, their beds packed with walkers meant to tear through the prison from the inside. They drove straight for the gates. Watching the oncoming trucks, Lily's lip curled. A ruthless glint flashed in her eyes. Now it's our turn to strike. Rick, through gritted teeth, countered the choke and twisted the governor's arm hard. The man grunted but elbowed Rick in the ribs. We're not like you, Philip, the governor snarled. Rick tightened his hold and pressed his face close. Every one of us is a warrior. Every one of us faces death. We don't need lies to bind us. We actually care for one another, and we love our home. You lost from the start, the governor spat. Meanwhile, a masked thug had just hoisted himself over the prison's wire fence to signal his crew when something whistled through the air. A razor-sharp length of metal dropped from the building like a javelin, slicing into the man's thigh and pinning him to the muddy ground. The scream that followed was animal and terrified. Target hit, someone called. From an upstairs window, Jackie wiped rust from her hands and looked at the pinned man with satisfaction. T-Dog, providing cover nearby, couldn't help but whistle. Where did you learn that? He asked with a half grin. Not from the city planners, Jackie replied, shrugging as she picked up another piece and weighed it in her hand. Just a hobby from high school. Come on, we don't get to waste the weapons Louis worked so hard to find. 237. A lie? A miracle. The battle erupted in an instant and became a one-sided slaughter. With National Guard soldiers covering the attack and preset traps in place, the so-called elite raid squad was stunned the moment they showed themselves. The lead truck drove straight into a pit. The walkers inside were incinerated before they even crawled free. As her teammates fell, Lily bit her lip and barked, "Retreat! Get inside the building!" She and the few survivors slipped through a side door and into the corridor beyond. Once indoors, long-range snipers and the traps would be useless. This complex was huge. If they could secure a few key hostages, like the opponent's relatives, they might force a stalemate. Lily tucked the gun tighter into her hands and swept the empty corridor with hard eyes. What's wrong? Did something happen outside? A voice sounded from the far end, thin with panic. Lily swung her head and saw a middle-aged woman with short, graying hair, carrying a basin of dirty laundry, her face a mask of confusion and fear. After confirming the woman was alone, Lily and her companion exchanged a look and rushed forward, weapons raised. "Freeze," Lily ordered, the muzzle of her rifle level with the woman's chest. "Hands up! If you don't want to die, don't make a sound!" The woman, Carol, gazed at the barrel, the laundry basin trembling in her hands. She shrank back and croaked, Don't shoot, please." Her eyes found Lily, pleading. "We don't have to do this. You're already surrounded. You should surrender. Rick's a good man. He will." "Shut up," Lily cut her off flatly. "I don't buy that. but I need you to cooperate, ma'am. Carol looked at Lily's hard face, sighed, and bowed her head. All right, she whispered. I'm sorry, too. Lily relaxed a fraction, then 3 sharp cracks rang out. Hidden beneath the heap of laundry in the basin was a loaded submachine gun. Bullets shredded the plastic and ripped through the clothes, cutting down Lily's 2 companions in an instant. Lily screamed as searing pain exploded in her thigh, and she hit the floor, her rifle skittering away. You, she managed, clutching the wound, staring at the submissive-looking woman who had just betrayed them. Carol tossed aside the torn basin and walked over to Lily with a cold, almost apologetic air. She bent, picked up the rifle from the floor, pressed the muzzle to Lily's forehead, and looked down at the attacker without a trace of fear. Sorry to disappoint you. On the other side of the compound, the fight had become personal. The governor missed a punch that smeared blood across the wall. Rick seized a machete and swung at the man's arm with everything he had. The governor rolled aside, and the blade bit deep into the wooden counter. Both men were spent, bloodied, and breathing hard, a few meters between them. The governor leaned against the counter and panted. What's the matter, Rick? Out of energy? Looks like your plan's not going so well either. Rick straightened, but didn't press the attack. He pulled a walkie-talkie from his belt and fixed the governor with icy eyes. If I wanted to, your people would have been dead long ago, he said quietly. The reason I'm talking to you this much is because someone here wants to give you one last chance. The governor sneered. A chance? You expect me to surrender to you? Rick ignored the mockery and hit the transmit button. His voice came out hoarse. How is it? After a stretch of static, Louis's calm voice crackled over the line. Found her. Rick held the walkie-talkie up so the governor could hear. Louis continued, measured. Neither you nor the residents outside need to die here. Surrender. Walk out and tell the others the truth about every lie you've told. The governor's face twisted with amusement and contempt. He looked at Rick as if beholding 2 delusional fools. You really think I'd do that? Louis's voice was steady, as if he'd expected that exact reaction. Before you decide, think about Petunia. The mockery in the governor's eyes faltered, then hardened into a dangerous glare. What do you mean? He demanded. You think I made up a name, do you? Louis said. Think about your daughter. She's right here beside me, the governor said at once, almost defiant. Silence stretched. Rick kept the walkie to the governor's ear, gun still in his hand. The madman's breathing had turned rapid. Then he let out a short, cold laugh. You think you can threaten me with my own child? Threaten? No. Louis's reply was soft. Then he asked a question the governor couldn't answer. Even if you don't care about walkers, don't you want to cure her? The governor stared, stunned as if the idea itself were absurd. Cure her? What did you say? I said I can cure her, Louis said simply. The words landed like a blow. I can reverse the process. I can make her the little girl who calls you daddy again. He went on, if you surrender now and admit the truth to the others, I promise to completely cure your daughter. The governor laughed. Then it curdled into something frantic and incredulous. Cure her? How can you guarantee that? Do I look like an idiot? Louis wasn't shaken. I can prove it. I can cure part of her first. Once you've kept your promise, we'll bring her back to the prison for follow-up treatment. Don't you want to see the results first? Woodbury, a hidden basement. Louis sat in a chair and watched the Walker girl claw at the cage, her teeth flashing as she lunged at him. He could have flattened Woodbury with the prison's firepower and Rick's tank. Killing them was easy. Breaking what the governor had built, his holdover people, was far harder. If they shot the governor now, the residents might only dig in deeper out of fear and misunderstanding. Survivors might escape and hide, nursing hatred that would fester into new threats. Louis had been looking for a way not only to win a battle, but to expose the governor's lies and shatter his followers' morale without fueling endless cycles of revenge. He'd once considered more direct, magical means, things like Imperio or Polyjuice, but those weren't options. So his eyes had fallen on the governor's single vulnerable point, his daughter. Petunia was already a walker. In the original story, the governor had been willing to trade everything to save her. If Louis could give the man even a sliver of hope, the governor might surrender everything for it. But did Louis even have a cure? Not exactly. He realized he didn't have to actually reverse the virus, only make the governor believe he could. The man was paranoid and desperate, convinced his daughter was still worth saving. If Louis could appear to fulfill that wish, it would be enough, and it might even supercharge whatever device he'd been working on. Louis looked at the vial in his hand, the beauty potion he'd tested and found effective even on walkers. It couldn't cure the infection, he knew, but it could change appearances. He glanced at Petunia in her cage and let a faint, mischievous smile curl his lips. As a first stage of treatment, making her look like a living child would be enough. 238. Driver's broadcast explanation regarding the temporary parking of this journey. Hello, dear passengers and friends. I'm very sorry, but today I have to make a broadcast I really hoped I wouldn't have to. It looks like our vehicle will need to pull over and shut down for a while. The main reason for this difficult decision is that we've run into some force majeure. As you all know, this book is on the fanfiction track. What is fanfiction? It's like me driving you all to revisit old places. Although I want to drive in my own style, since it's a revisit, it's inevitable that we'll pass familiar landmarks. What's awkward now is that the road administration has issued a violation notice, judging my vehicle's condition to be non-compliant. The reason given is that my driving trajectory too closely resembles the route of the original TWD fleet, and it must be rectified. When I first received the notice, I tried to adjust the route, but the final judgment didn't change. The current situation is that this vehicle has been forced into stealth mode. Existing passengers can still look back at the records of the scenery we've passed, but the vehicle can no longer take on new passengers. What's worse, the points on my driver's license are limited. Theoretically, there is one last chance to change the route, but if the second judgment still fails, this vehicle will be impounded and scrapped. In that case, you won't even be able to look back at those over 500,000 words of scenery records. That thought makes me very distressed. Imagine trying to take you sightseeing in Gotham, but being forbidden from even saying those two words in the navigation, from mentioning the Dark Knight or the Joker, or from describing the landmarks there. I really don't know how to keep driving and still let everyone know where we are. If the price of moving forward is to make the road we've already traveled unrecognizable, I'd rather stop in a good place and at least preserve the memories we've already made. To be honest, when I first received this news, I was very reluctant to accept it. It's the end of the month. In 2 days, I would have hit full attendance for this month. The Woodbury story was just about to finish, and Louis's journey still has a long way to go. I angrily filed an appeal, but the reply I received was that the judgment was correct. I studied the route they'd flagged as problematic and thought about it long and hard, and I still can't understand. If even this level of overlap isn't allowed, then why didn't I just drive on the original fiction track? Maybe it's just my lack of skill. When a novice driver hits the road, there are always rules they're unfamiliar with, and all you can do is complain about how hard the journey is. If I were the racing god of Mount Akina, even if the road were long and winding, there would always be a way through. But how could the racing god of Mount Akina run into a natural disaster? I had prepared for a long drive to take everyone to the finish line, but I didn't expect that, while the driver and passengers are all fine, the road ahead would suddenly be blocked by a natural disaster. It's tough. I'm very sorry to the friends who have supported me so far. The current route isn't even halfway complete, and there was so much more I wanted to show you. But so be it. Even novels can't always go the way we want, so how could reality be perfect? At least the experience I've gained and the joy you've found in reading can't be taken away. As for why the title says temporary, that's my last bit of hope. Maybe the weather has just been bad lately and we happen to run into it. When the sky clears and the rules change, perhaps one day we'll set off again. Thanks again to everyone who has supported this book. Until we meet again by fate.